Hey cuties, it's Evangelina here. This is the story of Lacy, a girl whose life was tragically cut short due to the inhumane conditions in which she was kept by her closest relatives. Lacy rarely appeared in public, so we don't know much about her. Neighbors remember her as a cheerful and inquisitive child who was passionate about volleyball, loved watching Disney cartoons, and enjoyed listening to country music. She seemed like a typical girl carelessly enjoying her childhood. But everything changed when Lacy turned 9. Her family, consisting of her mother Sheila and father Clay, moved to a new house in the town of Slaughter, Louisiana. Little did they know that these walls would become a real prison for their daughter. When Lacy was supposed to enter 9th grade, her parents suddenly decided to switch her to homeschooling. Maybe they thought it would be better for their girl, but in reality, it marked the beginning of her complete isolation from the outside world. Try to imagine being confined within the four walls of your own house without the opportunity to interact with peers, attend school, develop, and explore the world. This is the situation young Lacy found herself in, and no one even suspected her suffering. What prompted Sheila and Clay to make such a decision? Did they realize the consequences of their actions? These questions remain unanswered to this day. But one thing can be said for sure. Their decision drastically changed Lacy's life and led to tragic events. At first glance, moving to a new house and switching to homeschooling might seem like ordinary things that shouldn't raise any suspicions. However, in Lacy's case, they became the first steps on the path to her horrific fate. Try to imagine the life of a teenager who is afraid to step outside their own house, who doesn't have the opportunity to interact with peers, make friends, and explore the world around them. For Lacy, with her diagnosis, it was a real ordeal. She found herself trapped by her own fears and limitations. But this is just the beginning of the tragedies the girl had to face. Why didn't Sheila and Clay seek professional help for their daughter? For what reason did they decide that homeschooling and complete isolation would be a way out of the situation? As the years passed, Lacy became increasingly invisible to those around her. Neighbors who had once frequently seen the girl on the street could now barely remember when they last encountered her. It seemed as if she had dissolved behind the walls of her own home, vanishing from sight. Meanwhile, her parents, Sheila and Clay, continued to live their usual lives. Sheila worked as a secretary at the court and police station, and also owned a small bakery nearby. It seemed like nothing special, just a routine job. But later, shortly before her daughter's death, Sheila got a job as an assistant prosecutor in the town of Zachary, and even became a member of the Slaughter City Council. Quite a successful career, isn't it? Lacy's father, Clay, was a respected member of the community. He represented the non-profit organization Civil War Roundtable and was part of the Rotary Club. People valued him for his active community involvement and participation in the city's life. The Fletchers appeared to be an ordinary family that didn't stand out in any particular way. They occasionally attended the local church, like many other town residents. No one could have even imagined the horrors happening behind the closed doors of their house. While Lacy suffered in complete isolation, her parents continued to live their usual lives. They kept going to work, interacting with people, and participating in community affairs. Meanwhile, their daughter was slowly fading away within four walls, without any hope of rescue. Years had passed since Lacy was transferred to homeschooling, and the girl had practically vanished from the sight of those around her. During all this time, she was seen outside the house only once, when she was 20 years old. A random passerby noticed Lacy exercising near her parents' house. Maybe at that time, she still had a bit of freedom and strength to go out into the yard. The Fletcher's neighbor, Robert Blatz, was the last person to see Lacy alive. He recalled once talking to Clay about the girl. He inquired about how she was doing and where she had gone, as she hadn't been seen for a long time. Clay briefly replied that his daughter lived with them. She was in the house, and quickly changed the subject. At that moment, it didn't raise any suspicions for Robert. He probably knew about Lacy's social phobia and her health issues, so he didn't press further. Moreover, the Fletcher family had an impeccable reputation among the neighbors. They were respected members of the community, and nothing indicated any possible trouble. Lacy had practically vanished from the life of the community, and it didn't concern anyone. The girl who had once played on the street and interacted with neighbors suddenly became invisible, and everyone accepted it as a given. One can only imagine the despair and loneliness Lacy experienced during all those years. She was imprisoned not only physically within the walls of her own house, but also emotionally in the indifference and blindness of those around her. January 3, 2022, forever changed the lives of the Fletcher family and shook the entire local community. That day, Sheila called the police with a report that was hard to comprehend. Her 36-year-old daughter Lacy had stopped breathing. How could this have happened? What had been going on in this house all these years while Lacy was isolated from the world? Rumors immediately began to circulate around this incident. Some claimed that Sheila dared to call the police only because someone from outside was in their house at that moment. Allegedly, the very fact of someone's presence from the outside forced her to act. Otherwise, she would have continued to remain silent. One of the Fletcher's neighbors, who claimed to be in their house on that fateful day, noted that Sheila would hardly have called the police if not for his presence. This leads one to wonder whether it was an attempt by the mother to conceal the traces of her terrible neglect and indifference. What really happened on that January day? I'm afraid we will never know all the details. The only thing known for certain is that Lacy was found dead in her own bed, in a house that should have been a cozy shelter for her, but instead became a place of suffering and death. The following days and weeks were filled with investigations, interrogations, and examinations. Local residents whispered and shared speculations, trying to understand how such a thing could happen in their quiet community. Lacy's death marked the beginning of a long and painful process of seeking truth and justice. What law enforcement officers and medical workers saw in the Fletcher's house that January day will forever remain etched in their memory. In the living room on the couch, they discovered the body of 36-year-old Lacy Ellen Fletcher, who had spent the last 12 years of her life there. The scene that opened before their eyes was horrifying. Lacy's body was disfigured by pressure sores, which had likely formed due to prolonged contact with the surface of the couch. Her skin was covered in ulcers and her own excrement, indicating a complete absence of basic hygiene and care. The most shocking aspect was that the girl's body was infested with insect larvae and mouse droppings. This indicated that she had literally rotted alive in that spot, without any help or intervention. Medical experts who examined Lacy's body noticed that she had actually grown into the couch. It is quite possible that the girl had not gotten up from it for so long that her muscles had atrophied, and her skin had fused with the surface of the furniture. Lacy's legs were bent under her body in an unnatural position, indicating her prolonged immobility. At the time of her death, Lacy was wearing only a dirty, tattered t-shirt. She weighed a mere 43 kilograms 95 pounds, which was catastrophically low for an adult woman of her height. Most likely, the girl suffered from severe malnutrition and dehydration, which led to her death. Some sources also reported that the autopsy results revealed the presence of coronavirus in Lacy's body. This was surprising because, according to the testimonies of neighbors and relatives, the only people the girl had contact with in recent years were her own parents. The question arose, could they have been the ones to infect their daughter during the pandemic? When police officers began investigating the circumstances of Lacy Fletcher's death, one of the key questions was, what had caused her demise? The answer they received from medical experts was shocking. According to the coroner, Dr. Ivel Hasbrock Mims, Lacy had fallen victim to serious medical neglect by her caregivers, her own parents. For years, they had disregarded their daughter's basic needs, leading to a whole range of health problems. Due to chronic malnutrition and acute starvation, Lacy's body was depleted, deprived of vital nutrients. Her muscles had atrophied due to prolonged immobility, resulting in the formation of pressure sores and ulcers on her body. But the most terrifying aspect was that at some point, Lacy developed osteomyelitis, an infectious inflammation of the bone tissue. The pathogens had likely entered her body through open wounds and ulcers. Without proper treatment, the infection spread throughout her body, causing sepsis, a life-threatening reaction of the body to inflammation. Law enforcement also investigated information that Lacy might have suffered from locked-in syndrome, also known as pseudocoma. According to some reports, the girl seemed to be in a state of paralysis, unable to move or speak, although her consciousness was alert. But Dr. Hasbrock Mims refuted these assumptions, noting that apart from the previously diagnosed autism and social phobia, no other neurological disorders were detected in Lacy. A striking fact is that Lacy's last documented visit to a doctor occurred when she was only 16 years old. Just imagine, 20 years without proper medical supervision, without basic checkups and tests. During this time, any disease could have developed and led to fatal consequences. In May 2022, after a thorough investigation into the circumstances of Lacy Fletcher's death, her parents, Sheila and Clay, were formally charged with second-degree murder. This was the first step towards justice for the girl who had suffered in silence for so many years. Despite the severity of the crime, they spent only 36 hours behind bars. Imagine, accused of their own daughter's death, they were released on bail of $300,000 each. This amount may seem astronomical to the average person, but for a couple who held quite high positions in the local community, it wasn't that much. Of course, releasing suspects on bail is a common practice in our justice system. But in this case, it was hard to accept the fact that people who had brought their own daughter to such a horrible state could calmly await trial in the comfort of their own home. However, even the highest bail could not soften the shock and outrage that gripped the jurors when they were shown footage from the crime scene and photographs of Lacy's body during the court session. Imagine people's reactions to these chilling images. Some couldn't hold back tears, while others turned away, unable to look at the screen. Even experienced lawyers and law enforcement officers, who had seen plenty of brutality in their practice, were stunned by the extent of suffering Lacy had endured. This evidence became irrefutable proof of the inhumane conditions in which the girl had lived the last years of her life. The jurors saw with their own eyes the pressure sores and ulcers on her body, the insects and rodents that had infested her bed, the filth and neglect of the room where she had spent her final days. During interrogations, Sheila and Clay Fletcher tried to justify their inaction and negligence in caring for their daughter. They told investigators that Lacy suffered from autism and an extremely severe form of social phobia, which only worsened over the years. According to their account, the girl was terrified of leaving the confines of the house and avoided any contact with the outside world. Allegedly, this was why she stayed in her room around the clock, refusing even to get up from the couch. The Fletchers claimed that the crisis in Lacy's condition occurred when she was a little over 20. The girl had supposedly completely withdrawn, isolating herself, losing any desire for communication and activity. She would allegedly scream and throw tantrums when someone tried to persuade her to leave her comfort zone. Clay and Sheila insisted that they had made attempts to help their daughter. They claimed to have tried to lift her from the couch, force her to move, but it only worsened the situation. Lacy would allegedly fall into such severe stress and aggression that the parents were simply afraid to change anything. Particularly cynical were Sheila's words about how Lacy never complained about the pressure sores and wounds that festered on her emaciated body. The mother claimed that she regularly examined and treated these ulcers, but the girl allegedly didn't want to be bothered. Throughout the investigation and trial, Sheila and Clay Fletcher tried to justify their inaction by claiming that Lacy was an adult and therefore had the right to make her own decisions about her life. They argued that the girl had consciously chosen to remain confined to the couch, refusing any activity or assistance. According to the parents' version, they simply accepted their daughter's choice and allowed her to exist in this way. The Fletchers insisted that Lacy had retained mental clarity and the ability to communicate until her last day, which meant she could have changed her situation if she had wanted to. But these statements raised serious doubts for me as an investigator. After all, the condition in which Lacy's body was found clearly indicated that the girl had been dying in bed for more than one day, surrounded by filth, parasites, and her own waste. This couldn't have happened suddenly, over a single weekend. The parents were well aware of their daughter's vulnerable mental state, but had not taken any measures for years to provide her with proper care and treatment. They had every opportunity to take Lacy to a doctor, turn to the appropriate services, arrange for hospitalization, or at least hire a caregiver. Instead, they simply left the helpless woman to fend for herself, dooming her to a slow and painful death. And even when the couple allegedly went on vacation, leaving their mentally ill daughter alone in such a pitiful state, it already amounted to criminal negligence. They should have been aware of the risks and responsibilities they carried as guardians of an incapacitated person. The defense tried to touch the jurors with the image of parents supposedly grieving for their prematurely deceased daughter. They hoped that the respected status of the family and the Fletchers' active community involvement would play in their favor. But the prosecution understood that a cruel truth was hidden behind the mask of respectability, and our task was to bring this truth to the court and secure a just punishment. The prosecutor insisted on a thorough investigation of all the circumstances of the case and the appropriate classification of the Fletchers' crime. In my opinion, their actions fell under the article of second-degree murder and should be punished with life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. And so, after months of investigation, dozens of witness interrogations, examinations, and fierce court battles, we finally reached the denouement of this chilling story. The jury, having heard all the evidence and arguments of the parties, found Sheila and Clay Fletcher guilty of murdering their daughter Lacy through criminal negligence and inhumane treatment. Witnesses remember the tense silence that fell over the courtroom when the presiding judge announced the verdict. It seemed as if the whole world had frozen in anticipation, and when the words, "life imprisonment without the possibility of parole," were uttered, one could hear dozens of people sighing with relief in that silence. Justice had finally prevailed, but the joy of victory was overshadowed by the realization of the full tragedy of the situation. Lacy, an innocent, defenseless girl who suffered from severe illnesses, had become a victim of the cruelty and selfishness of those who should have surrounded her with love and care. She died in agony, in complete loneliness, not understanding why such a fate had befallen her. During the announcement of the verdict, a heavy atmosphere filled with grief reigned in the courtroom. People were not ashamed of their tears, not hiding their shock and indignation. The journalists present seemed to not seek sensational headlines for the first time in many years. They simply silently honored Lacy's memory. Thanks to this tragedy, serious discussions began at the state level about guardianship of incapacitated individuals, the accessibility of medical and social assistance, and monitoring the observance of the rights of vulnerable population groups. And although there is still much work ahead, we have moved from a dead end and taken the first steps towards a more humane and responsible society. I know that the memory of Lacy will live on in the hearts of all who empathized with this tragic story. Hey there, this is Evangelina, and you're watching Crime Cat Channel. Today's story is about Paige Bergfeld, a woman whose life was full of secrets. Who was Paige really? What was she hiding behind the mask of a happy wife and mother? And what ultimately happened to her? The answers to these questions are already known, so I invite you on a fascinating journey through the dark corners of the human soul. Paige was born and raised in Denver, Colorado. Everyone who knew her described her as a kind, sincere, and extremely family-oriented girl. From a young age, she dreamed of a cozy home, a loving husband, and lots of children. To pursue a career, Paige enrolled in the nursing program at the University of Florida in Gainesville. It was there that she met Ron Bagler, her first love. Their feelings blossomed throughout their studies, and after graduation, the young couple decided to get married. Paige desperately wanted to become a mother, but Ron honestly admitted that he wasn't ready for such a responsibility yet. The girl was uncompromising on this matter; she couldn't settle for less. The couple discussed the situation at length and eventually concluded that it would be better to divorce. Despite the breakup, Ron and Paige managed to maintain a friendship. The man held no grudge against his ex-wife and fully understood her desire. After the divorce, Paige got a job as a dancer at a nightclub. It was there that she met her second husband, Rob Dixon. This wealthy and successful businessman immediately caught the girl's eye. Unlike Ron, Rob dreamed of a full-fledged family and children. Moreover, the Dixon family was actively involved in charity work, helping those in need, which greatly impressed Paige. In 1998, the couple got married and moved to Grand Junction, Colorado, not far from the bride's hometown of Denver. By 2001, the couple was already raising 3 wonderful children. Paige couldn't be happier with her family life. It seemed that all her dreams had finally come true: a loving family, a cozy home, and a caring husband. The woman dedicated all her time to her little ones, showering them with maternal love and affection. To the outsider, Rob and Paige's life seemed perfect. A strong family, wonderful children, a thriving business, a luxurious house, and expensive cars. However, serious problems lurked behind the shiny facade. Poor investment decisions led to the collapse of Rob's enterprise, and the man lost everything he had earned in an instant. The family found themselves on the brink of losing the roof over their heads, as their house was mortgaged. Against the backdrop of financial hardship, the couple began to quarrel frequently, and loud arguments became commonplace in their home. In 2001, during yet another conflict, a frightened Paige called the police. When law enforcement arrived at the scene, Rob assured them that the situation had already been resolved and the misunderstanding had been settled. However, in 2005, the woman dialed 911 again and reported that her husband had lunged at her while holding one of the babies in his arms. This time, Rob was arrested. To avoid more serious consequences, the man made a deal with the investigators and admitted his guilt. The court ordered him to undergo mandatory anger management courses, after which the charges were dropped. Rob himself claimed that nothing of the sort had actually happened, and that Paige simply wanted to gain an advantage in the matter of child custody. Dark times fell upon Rob. His financial situation deteriorated to such an extent that he had to declare bankruptcy. The perfect picture of a happy family shattered to pieces. In 2006, the couple officially divorced. Rob headed to California, leaving Paige alone with all the worries about the children. The woman opened her own dance school to provide a decent life for her little ones. However, some sources claim that Paige was not actually the owner of the establishment, but merely worked there as a teacher. Thanks to a flexible work schedule, she could devote as much time as possible to her sons and daughter. It seemed that life was gradually getting back on track. But everything changed in the summer of 2007. On June 22, Paige attended a pool party where she shared her concerns about her own safety with a friend. However, the friend didn't take it too seriously, assuming that Paige simply wasn't used to single life yet and might be afraid of her ex-husband Rob. The friend tried to cheer Paige up, reminding her that Rob lived very far away from her, so there was no reason to worry. On an online forum, Paige shared her fears about her ex-husband Rob. She wrote that even the children were anxious about his behavior. But despite her concerns, on June 28, 2007, the woman left her kids in the care of a nanny and went to visit a friend. No one ever saw Paige again. 3 days passed before Ron Bagler, the missing woman's first ex-husband, contacted the police to report her disappearance. The news stunned Paige's loved ones. Her stepmother Susie and father Frank were convinced that their daughter would never do anything like this. She loved her children too much to abandon them. Soon, the investigators encountered an unexpected fact. It turned out that Paige had not one, but 2 failed marriages behind her. Her first chosen one was none other than Ron Bagler. And, ironically, It was he who, having reported the disappearance of his ex-wife, found himself among the first people the police wanted to interrogate. As Paige's father recounted, Begler was once his daughter's true love. But most interestingly, in recent months, the former spouses had begun dating again. According to Kelly, Paige's brother's sister-in-law, the woman was extremely excited about rekindling her relationship with Ron. 10 years after the divorce, she confessed to her family that she had fallen in love with him again. But what most intrigued the investigators was the fact that on the day of her disappearance, Paige was with Begler. Their date took place in the town of Eagle, Colorado. As far as I know, Paige and Ron had a picnic and spent half a day together. The day after Paige's disappearance, Begler visited her home, where he found only the nanny with the children. While the Bergfeld family continued their search for the missing woman, the sheriff's office launched its own investigation. Professional divers were called in for the operation, but suddenly, a disturbing call came through to the 911 line. An eyewitness reported a car burning in a deserted parking lot. As it turned out, it was the same vehicle that Paige had set off in on the night of her disappearance. In the morning, law enforcement officials determined that the source of the fire was the passenger side of the car, and the driver's seat had been pushed back. These details led investigators to believe that someone had deliberately tried to destroy important evidence. Service dogs were brought in to examine the scene. One of them, catching a scent, led the police to a nearby van store. This seemingly minor detail would later prove to be remarkably important. While Paige's loved ones desperately hoped for her safe return, detectives focused their attention on the missing woman's second ex-husband, Rob Dixon. Details soon emerged about the woman's calls to 911 and the fact that she was selling kitchenware for the Pampered Chef Company. This firm operated on the principle of network marketing, and Paige, as one of the most successful representatives, had even won a free trip to the Caribbean. Investigators also came across a forum where the woman wrote about her fear of her ex-husband Rob. Dixon was interrogated about his whereabouts on the day of Paige's disappearance, but the details of the conversation were not disclosed. However, the missing woman's relatives received encouraging news. Rob's alibi was confirmed, as he was more than 3,000 kilometers away from Colorado at the time of the incident. Thus, both of Paige's ex-husbands had a solid alibi. So who could have been interested in her disappearance? Not only the police, but also numerous volunteers joined the search. It is worth noting that Mesa County, where Paige lived, is a rather large territory with an area of about 8,500 square kilometers. The participants of the search operation combed the area several times but found no trace of the missing woman. 2 weeks had passed since Paige's disappearance when a new lead emerged. On the side of Highway 50, the woman's personal belongings were found scattered: a checkbook and a video rental card. Most interestingly, this location was approximately 25 kilometers from where Paige's burned-out car was discovered. Following this revelation, the police learned shocking details about the missing woman's life. Just a few days ago, everyone was convinced that Paige was an exemplary mother and wife, but now facts about her secret life, which even her closest relatives had no idea about, began to surface. The shocking truth about Paige's secret life stunned everyone who knew her. It turned out that in addition to dance lessons and participation in network marketing, the woman moonlighted as an escort under the pseudonym Carrie. Her profile was found on adult websites, offering a wide range of intimate services. "I was shocked," confessed prosecutor Pete Hotzinger, who had 20 years of experience under his belt. "In all my career, this is the first time I've encountered such a case. A good mother, a financially secure woman, and suddenly such a horrible story." Despite the fact that this information came as a real blow to Paige's loved ones, they had no doubt. The only reason that pushed her into the arms of escorting was her children. She found herself in the role of the sole breadwinner and was desperately trying to make ends meet, her brother Craig explained. According to relatives, Paige was drowning in debt. She had 3 little ones to support, Her ex-husband had declared bankruptcy and was paying a measly alimony of only $500 a month. In addition, the mortgage on the house was almost $6,000 a month. Investigators thoroughly checked all the clients of the missing woman. Among them was 30-year-old painter George Coralluso, who called Paige as many as 20 times on the day of her disappearance. Interestingly, just 2 days after she went missing, the man hastily left town. Another client turned out to be 56-year-old Lester Ralph Jones, a father of 2 adult sons. Having obtained a search warrant, police officers spent several hours thoroughly searching the house where the suspect lived with his third wife. However, law enforcement officials did not disclose what exactly they managed to find. But most interestingly, Lester Ralph Jones worked as a mechanic at the same van store where service dogs led investigators from the parking lot where Paige's burned-out car was found. Could this be just a coincidence? But that's not all. One of the last phone conversations the missing woman had on that fateful evening was with someone using a disposable cell phone. And according to the investigation, there is a video recording from a local store showing a man, presumably Jones, buying such a track phone. 3 months after Paige's mysterious disappearance, officials publicly cleared both of her ex-husbands of suspicion. Lester Jones was our main suspect, said Deputy District Attorney Dan Rubenstein, who headed the investigation into the case. He had no doubt that it was Lester Ralph Jones who was Paige's killer. But unfortunately, without the victim's body, it was impossible to prove his guilt. 5 long years passed since Paige's disappearance until, in 2012, a random traveler stumbled upon human remains. Experts had no difficulty identifying the find thanks to dental records. It was established that these were the remains of the missing woman. But the most shocking discovery was the circumstances of her death. Despite the lack of direct evidence, Prosecutor Rubenstein was convinced that the collected testimony was sufficient to bring charges against Lester Jones. After all, it was near the suspect's place of work that the victim's burned-out car was found. The seat in the vehicle had been pushed back to accommodate someone much larger than Paige. And then there was the infamous track phone, a disposable phone from which the woman was called 5 times on the day of her disappearance. We have video evidence that it was Mr. Jones who purchased this track phone, Rubenstein stated. Having obtained a warrant, the police thoroughly searched the vehicles of Lester and his wife. After completing the investigative actions, Sergeant Smith personally informed the suspect that his vehicles would be returned to him soon. This call, combined with other evidence, played a crucial role. On the eve of Thanksgiving in November 2014, Lester Jones was arrested and charged. Oddly enough, he seemed not at all surprised by this turn of events. In July 2016, exactly a decade after Paige's mysterious disappearance, the trial of her alleged killer began. But after 6 weeks of hearings, the jury reached a deadlock, although they were all convinced of Jones' guilt. A retrial had to be scheduled, which ended just before Christmas of the same year. This time, the jury was finally able to reach a unanimous verdict: guilty. Lester Ralph Jones was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Currently, the convict is serving his sentence, but continues to appeal the court's decision. In one of the sources, I came across interesting information regarding Jones' possible motive for committing the crime. Someone, whether Lester himself, the police, or perhaps just speculation, expressed the opinion that the man killed Paige because he was afraid she would tell his wife about their affair. However, it is impossible to say with certainty whether this is true. Currently, Paige's 3 children live with their father on the East Coast. They say they will never forget their mother, who spared no effort to provide them with a decent life. What do you think about this story and about Paige herself? Share your thoughts in the comments. That's all for now. See you next time.